process of making it? I mean, at what point when you were speaking to Brian did you suddenly think there's a real story to be told, a really important story about Merseybeat and about pop music in general? So at what point did you think there must be a film, a documentary, some kind of record that I can make?
First of all, I just want to say thank you very much to everybody who came. I hope you enjoyed the film.
Thank you.
And,
Thank you.
I'm from Canada. I'm not from Liverpool, as you might notice. But Griff had moved to Canada a long time ago. And another filmmaker came to me and said, I know this guy, and his dad was in this band and, played in Liverpool. I was like, okay. He said, you want to meet him and see if we can maybe make a film. And so that's how I met Griff. And then I met him for the first time, and we sat down for about 3 hours. And just listening to all these stories and understanding their importance in the scene, not just as one of the many bands. There's 300 bands, as everyone knows at that time. But they were one of the integral bands, signed with Epstein, Decca Records, had everything on a plate for them. Hutch was asked, and so on and so on. There were so many stories that intertwined with that history in the Beatles, and I thought, wow, this is more than just one of the bands. And so we decided to start making a film. And 5 years later, here you go.
It's a long process. We'll talk about
is,
that bit later on. Nikki, thank you so much for coming as well. And we see you in the film very briefly.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit more, because you're around the scene, you knew the guys, you were there. So give us a little pen picture of your own, of the guys. And also, I mean, a remark you made about Brian Griffiths' guitar playing, because as a fine guitarist yourself. Tell us what was so special for you.
Well, is this on? No? I used to share a flat with Griff way back before anybody became famous. And he's freely admits it, he was an alcoholic in those days. Pretty much all of us were. And we never thought that anything was going to happen. We all thought, well, it'll all be over in a year, so we may as well grab it while we can, just enjoy ourselves. And that's exactly what happened. But my association with them was because I always associated with, I tried to associate with people that I could learn something off. And Griff was the best guitarist on Merseyside, Gus was the best bass player, and Hutch was the best drummer. Gus was the best singer, in my opinion, and Hutch was a close second. And everybody copied off them, including the Beatles, and every other band all copied off the big three. So that was how I associated with them. And also, they were all very aggressive, as I was in those days, not now. And I found out that if you stood up to them, then you were friends for life then. But if you gave way to them in any way, then you were finished, So, and I was just lucky like that. And that's, the same with the Beatles, particularly with John Lennon. If he had a go at you or something like that, you had to stand up to him, otherwise you were finished, So they were the people that I associated with. And it was just purely because they were good musicians that I could hopefully learn something from, And I liked the music that they played. I stood in with them loads of times, went to Germany, to Hamburg and all that, and did exactly as in that film, and that was just normal to us,
A lot of competition, but also a lot of camaraderie, and I'm really touched by some of the stories there of band members helping each other out.
Oh yeah.
The aftermath of Pete Best being sacked as well, and Hutch, I'm not going to join the Beatles, I'm not, when I've done this, I'm not going to take his place.
Yeah, well, I went to school with Pete, so that's how I know Pete Best. But it was a big shock when that happened, and it was almost sanitised for the film. It didn't really happen like that. It was a lot worse than that. But Pete's come out of it very well and is very happy about it now. Hutch was genuinely upset about it, as lots of other people were, as far as that's concerned. And yet we did stick together. There was loads of instances, not just in the big three and the Beatles, but in all the bands. There was splits and arguments and whatnot, you know, but people were loyal and stuck together. There's this silly thing where, you know, you can't do that number because the Beatles do it, and you can't do that number because King Size Taylor does it, you know. I never got that myself, but because I just did whatever numbers I wanted to do, and that was it. But people did stick with that. It was very strange, even to this day. You know, there's I know in the last 5 years, for example, you know, there's King Size Taylor and the Dominoes were playing on a particular venue in Liverpool, and this band got up quite innocently and did some of the guy Slow Down, and that was recognised in 1962 as King Size Taylor's number. You know, and Terry Taylor was in the dressing room, went absolutely bananas. This band had actually had the nerve to do his number. I'm talking like 50 years later. What are you talking about? That's it's just very strange sort of thing that went on there. Tell you another story. It's nothing to do with the Big Three or with the Beatles or anybody really. What you have to appreciate is that there was closer to 500 bands going around Liverpool at the time, and we were cut off from the rest of the country. There was one instance where somebody said that if you went, Griff said, if you went in the Click down in London, then you had no chance unless you had an intermediary like Epstein or something like that. And that was absolutely true. We were cut off from the rest of the country, and that's why Merseybeat, a combination of Liverpool and Hamburg, that's how Merseybeat developed, because we had nobody else to turn to and nobody else to associate with really. But later on, many years later, if you think about it, the average number in a band was 4, and there was getting on for 500 bands. That's like 2,000 people that we all knew. We all knew each other, and of course, life takes over, and we all start dying. So it ended up after a few years of continuous funerals, where we're all looking at each other and saying who's going to be next. And they actually started a bet on who was going to be next. And I thought, that's it for me. So I don't go to funerals anymore. Because it got, you know, it really affected you emotionally and mentally, you know. You just, I can't do this anymore. Because the average person just goes to, I don't know, let's say a dozen funerals in their life. We were going to hundreds of them, yeah. It was just too much, really, yeah. So the effect of that decade, the 60s decade, had far-reaching effects on all of us. Quite weird. I can't say anything else about that.
Well, it's an incredible story, and the fact that he's told that you've picked out the Big Three as a band who could have made it. He was still very instrumental in, as you can see there, knowing Beatles, knowing the other bands, Cilla Black's career at the very start of that. This is a bit of departure for you, Todd, because doing a bit of reading about you, I understand this is your first attempt at a documentary, but you still had to write it, you're still constructing the story. So how did you actually go then from talking to Brian Griffiths and thinking, okay, you know, there's a really good basis for a film here, and actually constructing this story and finding the people to interview?
Yeah, so I come from a background of live action film, and this was the first documentary that I did. And luckily I had that experience that I could draw from, and trying to structure the story. We rearranged it quite a bit, many times, trying to figure out the best way to tell the truth, tell the story, and make it the most appealing and entertaining for an audience to watch. And then we just went back to the basics, which was just telling it chronologically. And that's why we had to have a bit of Griff in there with his first band, Derry and the Seniors, and then the stories with Pete and that kind of thing in Hamburg, just to tell it properly so that people could understand where they came from in the history. And I mean, hopefully it worked out and you enjoyed it and it made sense. Yeah.
And Nikki, I mean, it's amazing to see some of those musicians there as well, particularly in the early days. So having, you know, producing the story in chronological order and looking at those early bands, I mean, some amazing characters there.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, both Griff and myself were both made up with this documentary because it's I've seen loads of, I've been in loads of documentaries. I've been in about 20 odd, either set in Italy or Germany or France or somewhere, you know, and that's the last you see of them, you know. They do all sorts of interviews and whatnot, you know, and say, oh yeah, checks in the post and all that. It never happens. And they've all been gradually, they get about 50 hours of filming, and then it's all sanitized down so that not to offend anybody. Thank God this man has kept it real, you know, and used the proper footage, if you like, you know. I've never seen a documentary where there's been so much swearing in it, and Hutch just sitting there with a toothpick hanging out of his mouth, you know, effing this and effing that. But that's exactly what it was like in those days, you know. We lived from day to day and never thought that anything was going to happen. Even when the Beatles made it so big, we still had the attitude that it's going to be over tomorrow and that'll be it, you know. The fact that they survived for so long, I mean, they only survived up until about 68, 69. So in reality, they only lasted about 10 years, I suppose, something like that. Yeah, they went on to do individual things, you know, but it's never the same, really. That was quite a real thing that Griff said when he said he's played with loads of people and loads of different bands over the years since then, but it was never the same as with Gus and Hutch, and that's true. You know, I have the original band I was in was Phalanx Flamingos, and we reformed many years later, 1989, and I went round and picked the three of them up, and we were all living in all different parts of the world then, and we didn't rehearse or anything. We just went on to a show and just did it, and it was just like yesterday. It was just amazing. Best band I've ever been in, you know. And then I joined the Mojos, and we got together donkeys years later, you know. And it's just amazing how you play with certain people, and it's just there. The band I'm playing with now, we're all in our mid-70s. We've known each other for 70 years, and we don't even talk now. The drummer, he just wants to know what speed it is and whether it's swing or hard rock. And the bass player just wants to know what key it's in, and that's it. You know, we don't rehearse, we just go on and do it. Because we enjoy doing that. We always enjoy a challenge, you know, keeps us awake.
It's that perfection, and that's kind of that understanding as well.
It is for us. It is for us, you know. I'm not saying, and that was the problem with the big three, was that they had the same sort of attitude. They didn't want to rehearse. They didn't want to be pop stars. They didn't want to do pop songs at all. They did certain songs, certain slow songs, and certain love songs, I suppose, really. But they were always unusual, and there was always a reason why they did those particular songs. Like Johnny Guss actually used to do Lavender Blue, and did it great. And oh blimey, Hutch used to do some True Love, Let True Love Begin and stuff like that, and they enjoyed doing that, but they wouldn't admit it. You know, it just made a contrast to all the hard stuff they did.
It makes it a very intriguing story as well, because it's also about creativity and in music, letting expressing yourself and expressing yourself naturally. Yet you have the contact, the man who can make it happen, Brian Epstein, and everything's tightly controlled. The image has to be there. Not the first time in pop music history, or the last time that somebody's doing that.
Yeah. Well, that's what happened when the Beatles became famous and all that. The whole of music changed, because it was all so organised down here in London, where you'd get A&R man and you'd get songwriters and you'd get music publishers, and the music publishers rule the world because that's where all the money was. And a songwriter was that's all he did. He went into a room with a piano, wrote songs and divvied them out, and then the A&R man would decide who was going to perform it or sing it. And players or singers, they were just artists, you know, and they were lucky if they got a penny a record between them all, you know, all that sort of stuff. But all that changed when the Beatles started writing their own songs and sort of stuff this, you know, we'll have our own publishing company, you know, and they basically dismantled the whole music scene, if you like. Everything changed, and there was nothing London or the organisation could do about it, you know. It just happened that way.
And how times have changed now. in
Absolutely.
terms of
Well,
music
you've got the likes
and
of
the film industry.
Yeah, you've got the likes of Elton John and the Rolling Stones and people like that, David Bowie, George Michael. They all made the decision, they all followed that decision to have their own publishers and make their own contracts somehow, you know, instead of being forced
Prince
into
was
it.
another man who really did take on the record companies.
Absolutely, yeah,
and-
yeah. Good on him. I wish I had the opportunity.
But I
I'm
mean,
very happy with what I've done and what I'm doing, yeah.
and we come to this later. I know so many musicians who are self-publishing material, putting it out themselves. I mean, Todd, it's the same for you as a filmmaker, really. Funding for this film and getting funding and being able to create the film. I mean, what's the process for that? I see some Canadian funding names there, but was that the route? Did you go through crowdfunding? How did you source the money to actually get this film completed?
We didn't do crowdfunding, but there was a few Canadian organizations that were funding it, which was great. But it's really tricky. You'd think it'd be a lot easier to make this film with English funding and whatnot, but it's so hard. Like, who do you get to? How do you get to them, and that kind of thing. So we had some opportunity in Canada to have the funding, and we just went with that. You know, it was just enough to get it done. We could have had more, but maybe this took 5 years as it is, so it might have taken that much longer. And quick response to your question earlier about when we were starting to put together the film and all the interviews, it was really through Griff, because they had a reputation, and when he came back, he wasn't sure if people were still mad at him for all those years ago. But really, he opened the door, and when we asked different people to do interviews, every single person said yes. And there's no money involved. They just wanted to do it because they wanted to join the conversation and participate. So that's where it came from. It's just the respect of the band from those days and of Griff. Yeah, that's why we were so lucky to have so many interviews. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, such a wide spectrum of people within the music industry. You know, the lady running the fan club as well. So many different people, so many people who are prepared to speak. It's a brilliant thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to put it out to the audience now. I want to make sure that you get a chance to ask a few questions as well. I think we do have a person on the mic, or we're going to, but if anybody has a question.
Yeah, just Eric Clapton was in Liverpool. I'm here. Hi. Eric Clapton was in Liverpool in about 62, 63 with Brian Cassar in a band called Casey Jones the Engineers. I just wonder whether he saw the big three, whether that was an inspiration for Cream. Any ideas whether Eric saw the big three?
I wouldn't be at all surprised at that, because nobody can appreciate what the big three were like in those days. Before the Beatles, you know, they were, and nobody's really, it's like the Beatles. There was about 3 different versions of the Beatles, and unless you lived in Liverpool in 1959 and onwards, and you were old enough to go into the Cavern and all these different venues, nobody saw the Beatles as they were when they started. And then when they first came back from Hamburg, or unless you were in Hamburg, nobody saw the second incarnation of them, if you like, and they were a totally different band again. And then when they came back again and Paul took over on the bass, they were a totally different band again. And again, if you weren't in Hamburg or Liverpool, nobody's ever seen them or understood them. And then likewise, apart from the odd gigs they did up and down the country, nobody's seen the big three. So you can't really appreciate what they were like on stage. They absolutely blew everybody literally off the stage. Well, that's all I can say really. You know, the Beatles tried to imitate them in the power and all that. but they never really got there. In fact, in my opinion, they copied a lot of stuff off the big three.
Not just
And it was absolutely genuine what they said in the film there, that nobody went to see no girls would admit that they followed the big three. You know, it was always fellas that were, you know, because they were hard and they were aggressive and all the rest of it, and they got this incredible sound, and they did hard numbers. And certainly what Hutch said was true. They'd go down, they'd play in the cab, and the first 6 rows would be all musicians. That's, you know, everybody went to see them, you know. And I was fortunate in that I knocked around with them anyway, and we played the same kind of music as them. And I loved Griff playing, so I was always copying of him, you know. Never succeeded in getting as good as him, but, you know, I tried. When I went over to see him in Canada, and I don't know when it was, somewhere in the 80s or something like that. And we were just sitting on the back porch in his house with 2 guitars, and I said to him, you know, play the solo in Some Other Guy. He couldn't remember it. And I spoke to him literally 3 days ago, and he said, what you've got to understand is we went in there, we were all knackered, and we did about 2 or 3 takes of that. And he said, and that solo that he did then just happened to be the one that he played at the time. He and I both do the same thing. I don't play solos on stage, simply because you'll always get some smart ass who'll come up and say, you know, well, that was great that, but you should have played a flat and fifth in the 14th bar or something like that, you know. So I never play the solos off a record, because there's always somebody who'll criticise it. But if you do your own thing, they can't criticise. And Brian has the same attitude. But he didn't know he was always drunk, so he could never remember the solos anyway, you know. And he was just a naturally gifted player. He can just do anything. But when I went over to see him, he couldn't remember it. And I actually showed, I'd learned the solo, you know, so I actually showed him how he played it, or how I thought he played it. And then he came, oh yeah, I remember doing that, you know, but I wouldn't have done that, I would have done this, you know. So between them, we got it right in the end, you know, it's about half an hour. You know. But
That's
I don't know whether I'm answering a question here or what I'm doing here.
Hi there.
I'm rambling a bit. Go on.
That's okay. That's good stuff. Yeah, Todd, I think well done. Great film and very enjoyable. And I really like your graphic style on screen. Really added to it, and it got a lot of information out that way very quickly throughout the film. That was my first point, and also just to have, you know, the interviews of Johnny Gus before he passed. That was really great. And what made it for me was his son's performance at the end was quite incredible. Just a great piece, performed brilliantly. That was quite something. And just one small question that you mentioned Danny Patesh became their manager. Danny is still very active. Just wondered if you tried to get him involved.
We did. I'll go back. So with the illustrations, the reason why we had to use illustrations and a bit of the Scylla footage and so on is because none of the TV shows that they played we could find anything whatsoever. And Granada actually did go and record them at the Cavern Club for a few days on a couple of occasions. And that would be the most amazing footage for me to watch, because that would be them in their element playing live, really just not giving a damn. And so if that ever turned up, that would be fantastic. With his son, when his son played, we interviewed them after he passed away. And so we got some bits and pieces, and I was saying, oh, you know, your dad must have taught you some stuff on the piano, this and that. And the girls were like, oh yeah, you know, you're going to play something at the end? And they were all like, no, we're not going to play. So we did the interview, and I brought it up again. I said, okay, is anyone going to play something? And that's when his son just broke that out and said, okay, I'll play something. And, you know, we can't really understand what he's saying. They're from Whitstable. But started playing that song, and I was right there, just a few feet away. And my own father had passed away as well. I couldn't look at them. I had to turn away. It was too powerful for me. So I knew that would go in the film, and it was nice that we could tie some of the stories in together with Hutch as well, because Hutch, Gus was still alive at the time when we interviewed Hutch, and he really wanted to see him and speak to him, and he said, can you give me his phone number? And he was so ill, Griff said, we can't, because Gus was still bitter 50 years later about it, and that probably would put him over. And so yeah, I mean, it worked out well, the song and the stories. And then with Danny Batesh, people ask, is there anyone that you would like to have interviewed for the film? And I don't know if we necessarily needed anybody else. I think we got, I spoke to Mike McCartney, Paul's brother, and he gave us a few photographs for the film of the big three that he took himself, which is really generous. And it's his brother. He could get through to him. And we went a different route to try to get Paul, and it's just he gets inundated, probably hundreds of requests every single day. So you can't even get through the gatekeepers to get through the gatekeepers. And I didn't want to push his brother too much and that kind of thing. With Danny Batesh, I contacted them directly. And I think Danny is probably still so bitter all these years later. I don't know, but I suspect because they sort of screwed him over, right? Danny took them on, and then they still, they were the way they were. And this is what Griff suspects as well, is like they did respond, but then after we said what we were hoping for was to interview Danny Batesh, then we didn't hear back after that. So it's unfortunate, because I did want it more well-rounded, right? Not just everybody saying, oh, the big three are great, that kind of thing. I wanted more the rougher stories and people who were bitter and telling, as much as possible, just to have it be a true example of who they were. But yeah, that's what happened with Danny Batesh. Yeah, one of those things. But yeah, I think we got so many good interviews, and we were really happy with all that.
Well done.
I think we can take one more question if anybody's. Oh, okay. We'll take yours as well. I'll let you go first, but I will take a question afterwards.
Sure. Thanks. I actually have two small questions, but one was why was there such a close link between Hamburg and the Merseyside kind of sound? It's interesting, isn't it? Is it because they were both harbour towns? And the other question is around the film. I really love the way, because you take these big figures, everyone knows the names, they're such a big part of the cultural history, and you bring it completely back down to the human level where they're sharing bunks in Hamburg. Was that a deliberate drive, or did that just come out naturally in the filmmaking?
I think it was just natural.
Yeah, just happened.
Yeah, there were a lot. We had so much footage and so many stories, and there's a lot of really great stories that you just can't fit in the film because you're trying to tell the whole history. And even though it was a couple years, essentially, when the band was together, but yeah, you had to. We had interviewed people that just didn't make the film, like Horst Fascher. He was a huge figure in the Hamburg scene, and a lot of people had great stories, like Mitch Murray as well, like Beatles stories and these stories, and you're laughing out loud. Like when Horst was telling the story, I couldn't contain myself. But you think that doesn't really fit in this story of telling the big three story, so we had to cut a lot of that out. But yeah, it was just all natural. They just were telling stories. I mean, I'm sure if Paul McCartney met Griff in a bathroom, they would just go, hey, yeah, and it would be like yesterday, really would. Mm-hmm. But trying to get through to Paul, like even Pete Best said, it's been however many years, like 55 years, and he's never had a conversation with Paul McCartney ever again. And he said even when he was cut from the band, he only ever saw the rest of the band twice, and it was literally when they were playing the same venue, and Pete's band would come off and the Beatles would come on and just be like, hey, and he said that's the only two times he ever saw them, and he's never spoken, and now everyone's gone except Paul, who could really answer the questions that no one really knows the truth, supposedly, but he said, yeah.
The Beatles for a little while. He literally met the German in the Two Eyes with the big three, and he had the idea of taking a band over there because they had lots of clubs in the Große Freiheit. tell a little story about that. Whenever a band went over there, the Grocer Friar particularly, not the Grocer Friar, yeah, the Grocer Friar, and the Reeperbahn in general were a very, very rough area. There was also, gangsters around with koshes and guns and knives and God knows what. Very, very scary place. But when you played, particularly with the Star Club, Horst Fascher gave you a little badge. And if you went to a cafe or a restaurant or to a club or anything like that, then nobody would touch you as soon as they saw that badge, because they knew that basically the German mafia was behind you. So you could get away with murder, We didn't take advantage of that, but it was there. I personally wouldn't have been seen dead in Hamburg unless I was a musician and I had this badge. It was a very, very scary place. But it was just pure luck that it happened like that. And band after band went over there. It was just word of mouth, really. It's just the way. And everybody talks about the Star Club, but there was about half a dozen clubs that we played on. The Star Club, then the Kaiser Keller were the most famous, but there was the Indra and about 3 others. Can't remember the names of them at the moment. Top 10, yeah. So there you go.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was just pure luck.
Go on then. So
Yeah.
question for our young
Okay,
lady.
so I want to just lead on from there about the word of luck and circumstantial, because what I suppose I've picked up tonight is the big 3 were big along with the Beatles in the Cavern Club, and Cilla Black was involved in that, and Opportunity, and what we're talking about is artistic excellence and opportunity and luck. I thought it was a brilliant film in portraying that, actually, and giving everyone's perspective of their experience. And yeah, how comes the Beatles, who I love, made it as big as they did, yet the big 3 was obviously as expertise in their musicality in being as big as the Beatles. And I suppose I feel that there was sort of luck, circumstance involved in that, and I wonder what your thoughts are.
The Beatles made it basically because they were very talented at the end of the day. I personally think that George Martin was a huge factor in educating them musically and encouraging them to write the great songs that they wrote. And also, the other side of the coin was that they did exactly as they were told. The big 3 didn't write songs. Well, they'd wrote a couple, but that wasn't their expertise, and they would just not do as they were told, basically. And they were always going against the grain. That was just the way they were, along with many others. There was all the successful bands, like the Searchers, a hugely successful band. Nobody's made a documentary about them, and it's the same with the Mersey Beats and Jerry and the Pacemakers and all that. They all behaved themselves and were clever enough to do as they were told when they needed to, and follow good advice, if you like, And the big 3 just were rebels, basically. They just wouldn't do what anybody wanted them to do. I think there's still Hutch certainly is, and Griff to a degree, are still exactly the same now.
And John was like that.
Sorry?
Gus was like that.
Oh, Gus was like that.
Yeah.
Well, I always think of them as Griff didn't give a shit about anything, and Gus was very mischievous, couldn't resist doing pranks, for want of a better word, or pulling your leg, and Hutch was just aggressive, and that was it. And it's the same in little bit in that Lennon was always aggressive, Paul McCartney was always mischievous, and George didn't give a shit. George kept himself to it. George used to walk down Dale Street in Liverpool and look up at the office where I worked for 6 months when I first left school, and he'd just stand there and just do that, combing his hair, and he'd go down the cavern or to the graves, you know. And he did it just to wind me off, you know, because I couldn't get out of the office until lunchtime, you know, and then race down the cavern and have a pint in the graves, you know. But there
And
you go.
I just want to say I just love the fact with the family at the end and with
Oh, yeah.
the son Joe
Yeah.
in tribute to
Yeah.
John and all the family there. I thought that was a lovely touch. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, they actually, the family had never been to Liverpool, and after Gus died, they made the trip up to Liverpool, and I took them all around Liverpool, and we met Gus's brother. We went around all the venues and all that. They'd never seen, you know, and they saw the brick in the wall and in the cavern and everything, you know. They appreciated that. And I had some photographs of me and Gus playing on a couple of gigs up here that they'd never seen, you know. And they were all in bits. You know, we had to stop what we were doing for a couple of hours, just go into a hotel and just sit there because they were in bits. They'd never seen these photographs and appreciated, you know, the trip up. And even now to this day, you know, if I speak to them at all, which isn't that often, you know, it always ends up in tears. It's very sad what happened to Gus. He fought it for many, many years, you know, and I know when they were doing the interviews that he was in a lot of pain, and they wanted to stop it. And it was him that insisted. This is 2 weeks before he died. You know, he insisted on. He wanted to get it out of him, get it out of himself. You know, getting all emotional himself now. Yeah, because he's a lovely, beautiful guy. Gus, I'll tell you a funny little story about him. We did a gig with Howie Casey on the Grafton in Liverpool for the. You remember the thing in New Orleans when the storm hit? And you know, there was a big hoo-ha there. And we're just about to go on the stage. We're all individual musicians, it wasn't a band. And we're all being introduced. And I was standing just in front of Gus. And I'm just about to go on the stage, my big moment. And the fella says, "No, Nicky Crow's out the Mojos," and all that, you know. And Gus is right down my ear, you know. "No friggin' ninths." If you're a musician, you understand that, you know. No ninth chords, you know.
Yeah.
And it just absolutely destroyed me, you know. I sort of stumbled on the stage, you know. What's he talking about? You know? It's because that was what he was like. He was always the joker. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we've got to wrap up proceedings. There's so much to talk about around this film, and so many stories to come out of it. Todd, thank you so much. You've been to Liverpool with the film?
We went up there a couple times, and it was great because the reception. I mean, we premiered in Canada, but that was the UK premiere up there. We had a couple shows, and it was great because everyone, Hutch and Griff were there, and so people could interact and say, "I remember watching you here and there," and they, you know, signing autographs and that kind of thing. I think they really enjoyed it.
Where does the film go next? Have you got any hopes to get it video on demand or distribution anywhere?
Well, it's tricky because there's so much copyrights in the film, and we have rights for certain things and not for other things. And if a distributor takes it on, that's the problem. They'd really have to top up all the rights, and then to see what can be done with it. So we're not sure. I think at this stage, it would be nice to do a feature where we could really fill the feature with everything that you couldn't put in the documentary and make it really gritty and really dirty. And because I had the Scylla mini-series a few years ago, and we took a few clips from that, and there was a 3-parter on ITV. Something like that might be okay, or a feature, and you wouldn't really need too much money because you could shoot it in Liverpool. And I don't know if anyone's seen the Scylla musical that's touring around. So there's 3 young guys who play the big 3 in the musical, and they're really into it. I mean, we screened again in August, I think, in Liverpool, and then they played a set as the big 3. They just played last week. Did you go to that, Nikki?
No.
No, they played the Cavern Club as the big 3, like 3 young guys in suits and all that kind of stuff. Pardon me?
Pass me a bad time.
Yeah, too late. But I mean, he just got a huge tattoo of the big 3. They're just really into it, and so Scylla's son is the one who's behind some of that, the musical. So maybe there's some potential there. And also Ken, I think he's one of the guys with Arsenal, and he puts on a lot of musicals. So someone like that, who was a big fan of the Big Three and is now a big player, someone like that, if there was the funding involved, it would be great. I think that would, Ken Wright, that's right. So, so I think that would be the next step for a project like this. And just to touch on earlier when you said there's so many bands and only certain documentaries have been made, I think it would be great if, say, the BBC or something like that took on like a 6-parter or a 12-parter and did Merseybeat, because there's so much to cover and so many different bands, musicians, and so many stories to really tell. I mean, people just hear, oh, the Beatles came from Liverpool, and that's all you really hear, but there's so much of backstory. Like if Derry and the Seniors hadn't gone to Hamburg, the Beatles wouldn't have gone to Hamburg. And if Derry and the Seniors weren't good or great, then they would have said, don't send anybody else, this band's shit, we don't want any more Liverpool bands. But they were so good that they said, okay, keep sending them. Then the Beatles got to go, and then other bands got to go, and that would have changed music history completely. Like if the Beatles hadn't honed their craft, obviously, in Hamburg, they wouldn't have come back a different band and a better band, and so on and so on and so on, right? They just, it's not just they put out She Loves You and they exploded. It was like, they came from a whole huge base in Liverpool. And most people, I mean, here you might realize that, but in other places they don't really realize that, you know.
Well, it's an incredible period, and
Yeah.
thank you so much,
Thank you.
Todd, for bringing this film, London premiere. We love
Yeah,
premieres at Dock and Roll.
Yeah.
And Nikki, thank you so much for
Yeah,
recounting. There's so many other things we could talk about, but thank you so much. It's been brilliant.
Thanks, Nicholas. Thanks, John. So we have, I was just going to say, we have some posters that we could give away, and Griff had signed them if you'd like the poster of the film. Tony Booth was a man in Liverpool, and he did all those original posters for all the gigs at the time, and he was good before we released the film. So I reached out to his son Lee, and I said, would you mind if we had an artist sort of mimic your father's work just to do our film poster in that way? And he said, would you mind if I take a stab myself and do it? And I said that would be amazing. So he designed the poster that we have, and I have a few of them just to give away if anybody would like them. Yeah. So
I don't know if Anne-Marie wants to come down just to give a roundup of things. I mean, the festival's on until the 18th of November. Plenty more films to come. And a week tomorrow, we have the library music film here as well. Library music, underrepresented genre, but you know, many of our main programmes, grandstands, themed to that, many other programmes. Library music, Untapped. It's now a real cult. There's now a real cult following for it. I've used a lot of it in radio myself. We're going to have the guys behind the library music film here for a Q&A as well, so that's going to be a really good film. But Dock and Roll continues till the 18th of November. It's all over social media, Facebook, website, loads of venues all over London, loads of great different musical films. Thank you so much for coming. Have a great evening.